I never imagined I'd be telling this story, but here I am. My name is Piper, and I was 24 when my entire life flipped upside down. Back then, I had what most people would call a solid setup, steady job as a manager at a respectable company, my own rented apartment, and a boyfriend I adored. Jake and I had been together for 6 months, but it felt like forever. He was charming, successful, and everything I thought I wanted. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, planned vacations we hadn't booked yet, and imagined a future that seemed bright and inevitable. Things were getting serious, and I felt like I was living in a dream. "I think it's time you met my family," I told Jake one evening as we curled up on my couch, half watching some forgettable Netflix show. "They're going to love you. Even my sister will have to admit you're perfect." Emma, my younger sister, was 22 and fresh out of college. She still lived at home, trying to figure out her next steps in life. We'd always been close, despite the 2-year age gap, but lately, she'd been distant. I chalked it up to post-graduation stress, the kind that came with endless job applications and rejection emails. We planned dinner at my parents' house for the following weekend. I spent hours making sure everything would go smoothly, picking out the right outfit, reminding Jake about my parents' interests, hoping to make the best possible first impression. Jake arrived with wine and flowers, and my mother beamed as soon as he stepped inside. "Oh, Piper," she gushed, pulling me aside in the kitchen. "He's wonderful. Such good manners. And so handsome, too." I caught Emma rolling her eyes from her place at the counter, barely suppressing a snort. I ignored it. She was probably just jealous that my life was coming together while she was still figuring hers out. The evening went even better than I had hoped. Dad and Jake bonded over golf. Mom couldn't stop praising his career achievements. Even Emma, after some initial reluctance, warmed up slightly by dessert. As we were leaving, my mother hugged me tightly and whispered, "Don't let this one get away, sweetheart." Within weeks, Jake and I were talking about marriage. It wasn't a traditional proposal, just one of those conversations that turned into a decision. "We could do it in 6 months, Jake suggested one night over dinner, reaching across the table to take my hand. Nothing too fancy, just family and close friends. My parents were thrilled when we told them. They insisted on paying for half the wedding, with Jake's parents covering the other half. Emma sat silently through the entire conversation, picking at her food, occasionally letting out little huffs that everyone pretended not to hear. The next 5 months were a blur. Florists, venue visits, cake tastings, endless meetings with vendors. I was exhausted but happy, believing I was about to start the next beautiful chapter of my life. And then, one afternoon, everything shattered. It was a Tuesday. I had a headache, so my boss sent me home early. I thought I'd surprise Jake. Maybe we could order takeout, have a quiet evening, maybe even cross a few wedding tasks off our list. I unlocked the apartment door and stepped inside. It was quiet, too quiet. Then, muffled sounds from the bedroom. I assumed Jake was on a work call. He often took them in there for better sound quality. I walked toward the door. I reached for the handle. I turned it, and what I saw changed everything. Jake, Emma, tangled in our sheets. Time froze. The world narrowed to that single, unbearable moment. Emma didn't even look ashamed. She just stared at me with this bored expression, like I was interrupting something trivial. Panic flashed across Jake's face. "Piper, baby, I can explain." Something inside me snapped. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even say a word. I turned, walked to the closet, grabbed their clothes, and marched straight to the balcony. "Piper, don't!" Jake called out. Too late. Their clothes rained down into the parking lot below. "Get out," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Both of you." Emma had to wrap herself in the sheets as she shuffled toward the door. It would have been funny if I hadn't felt like I was dying inside. I slammed the door behind them and slid down against it, numb. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the walls, trying to process what had just happened. Then my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. For a brief, stupid moment, I felt relief. She must have heard. She must be calling to comfort me, to tell me everything would be okay. I answered. "How dare you humiliate your sister like that?" she hissed. "Throwing her clothes outside? Making her walk out in a sheet? What were you thinking?" I blinked. What was I thinking? What was she thinking? "She was in bed with my fiancé," Mom sighed, exasperated. "Oh, Piper, you're always so dramatic. This is exactly why the wedding is canceled." I cut her off, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'll contact the vendors tomorrow." "No, you won't," she said, her tone unnaturally calm. The wedding is still happening. Your father and I talked it over with Jake's parents. I couldn't breathe. We spoke with Jake and Emma, too. I shook my head, gripping the phone tighter. That doesn't even make sense. The wedding will proceed as planned, Mom said smoothly. Emma will take your place. 5 words. 5 simple words. They hit me like a physical blow. I actually checked to see if I was bleeding. Surely something that painful had to leave a mark. You can't be serious, I whispered. But I already knew. They were. I stared at my phone long after the call ended, the words echoing in my mind. Emma will take your place. Like I was some interchangeable puzzle piece. Like my life, my pain, was a minor inconvenience in their perfect little wedding plans. A bitter laugh bubbled up, but it died in my throat. I wasn't even angry yet, just numb. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The dinner where my parents had welcomed Jake so warmly. My mom's delighted whisper, "Don't let this one get away, sweetheart." The way Emma had sat quietly, saying so little while the rest of us talked about the wedding. Had she already known? Even then? Had she planned this? I barely had the strength to cry. The next morning, I called out of work and started making phone calls. The florist, the venue, the caterers. I calmly explained that the wedding was canceled and asked about refund policies. Most vendors were understanding until I called the dress shop. "Oh, honey," the saleswoman said. "Your mom already called this morning. She switched the name on the dress order." My breath hitched. She what? She said there was a mix-up, that you'd decided to let your sister use it instead. I gripped my phone so tightly my fingers ached. They hadn't just taken my fiancé, they'd taken my wedding, every decision I had made, every detail I had carefully picked out, and handed it to Emma like a consolation prize. I hung up without another word. Then I drove to my parents' house. They were all sitting in the living room when I arrived. Mom, Dad, Emma, and Jake. The sight of him, so casually sitting in my parents' house like he belonged there, nearly made me sick. "Piper, sweetheart," Mom said, all sugary warmth, "we were just talking about you." "No, you were talking about stealing my wedding," she sighed. "Oh, don't be dramatic." I ignored her and turned to Emma. "You're really doing this?" She crossed her arms, chin tilted defiantly. "You left, Piper. Someone had to step up. Step up. Like I had abandoned them. Like this was my fault." I turned to Jake next, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe some small, stupid part of me wanted him to show a sliver of regret. He just sat there, hands clasped between his knees, looking at the floor. Coward. I exhaled sharply, steadying myself. "Fine," I said. "Take him. Take the wedding. Take everything." Mom's smile faltered. "Then you'll come, right? We'd still love for you to be there." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want me to attend?" Dad finally spoke. "It would mean a lot to the family. Show that you support Emma." I couldn't take it anymore. "I am not coming to the wedding of my ex-fiancé and my sister." Mom's lips thinned. "This is exactly what I mean, Piper. You're always so emotional, so unreasonable." I clenched my fists. "You do realize they are the ones who betrayed me, right?" She just shrugged. "These things happen." I almost couldn't breathe. These things happen to who? I looked at my father, hoping for something. Some sign that maybe, just maybe, he didn't agree. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That was when I knew. They had made their choice. And it wasn't me. Something inside me went cold. I straightened, adjusting my bag over my shoulder. "I'll send someone to pick up my things." Mom frowned. "Now, there's no need for that." "There's every need," I interrupted. "I'm done." Emma smirked like she had won something. I let her, because I wasn't playing anymore. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. For the next few weeks, the phone calls came constantly. Mom, Dad, relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all leaving messages about how I needed to get over it and support my family. I ignored every single one. Then Sarah, my cousin, called. "Piper," she said carefully, "your mom's been telling people that Jake broke up with you because he fell in love with Emma, and that you're not handling it well." My hands tightened around the phone. "And," she continued hesitantly, "they're still planning the wedding, but they're telling people not to reach out to you because you need time to process things properly." I closed my eyes, forcing down the nausea. They weren't just trying to erase me. They were rewriting the story entirely. A new, acceptable version. One where I wasn't the betrayed sister, just the bitter one, the difficult one, the one who wasn't handling things well. I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a breath. "They can tell whatever story they want," I said. I don't care anymore. Sarah hesitated. Are you sure? I wasn't, but I would be, because they could steal my fiancé, my wedding, my family. But they would never take me. I wouldn't let them. The weeks leading up to Emma and Jake's wedding passed in a blur, and for the most part, I ignored every update, every whispered rumor, and every pointed social media post about love winning in unexpected ways. I had cut them off, blocked every number, changed my email, moved to a new apartment across town, but they wouldn't stop. It started small, relatives trying to talk sense into me, old family friends leaving pitying comments on my Instagram. Then my parents began showing up at my office, forcing security to escort them out. Emma sent a single smug text. You'll regret missing the wedding, Piper. Family is forever. I deleted it. Then, the final blow came. Late one evening, as I was closing my laptop after an exhausting day, my phone buzzed with a bank alert. I frowned. Transfer of $2,500 authorized. I nearly dropped the phone. My wedding savings. The emergency fund I had forgotten to move out of the joint account I had once shared with Jake. I had meant to close it, but with everything happening, I had let it slip through the cracks. My hands shook as I logged into my account. Zero. They had drained it. Not just Jake, Emma too. My sister. My breath came in short bursts as I scrolled through the transaction history, heart pounding. The money had been moved directly into an account in my mother's name. My mother. For their wedding. My stomach turned, and for a moment, I thought I would be sick. The betrayal was complete. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I went straight to my parents' house. I didn't knock. I walked in. They were all there. Mom, Dad, Emma, and Jake, sitting around the dining room table like nothing had happened. Emma glanced up and smirked. Well, well, look who finally came to her senses. I ignored her and turned to my mother. Where's my money? Mom didn't even blink. What money? I let out a hollow laugh. The $12,000 you stole from my account. She sighed, setting down her coffee. Oh, Piper, don't be dramatic. You weren't using it. I wasn't. My voice cracked with disbelief. That was my wedding fund. She shrugged. Well, now it's Emma's. Rage burned through me, hot and sharp. That wasn't your decision to make. Dad finally spoke. We had to do something, Piper. The wedding was already paid for, but Emma and Jake needed a honeymoon fund. It just made sense. I almost laughed at the audacity. You stole from me to fund their honeymoon? Jake, who had been silent until now, sighed heavily. Look, Piper, I didn't want it to come to this, but you're acting crazy. Maybe it's for the best that you're not in our lives anymore. I turned to him, eyes burning with fury. You are a cheating, spineless coward. And you... I faced Emma, who was watching me with amusement. You are the most pathetic excuse for a sister I've ever met. She scoffed. Oh, get over yourself. You should be thanking me. I saved you from marrying someone who clearly didn't want you. Something inside me snapped. I leaned in, my voice low and venomous. You think you won. You think taking my fiancé, my wedding, my money makes you superior? I shook my head. Enjoy your little victory, Emma, because you will never be me. Her smug expression faltered just slightly. I turned back to my parents. And as for you two, consider this your last conversation with me. You are dead to me. Mom gasped. Piper, don't be ridiculous. No, I cut her off, stepping back. You made your choice 3 years ago, and now I'm making mine. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture of the bank transaction, and held it up. I hope the theft charges will be worth it. Dad's face paled. You wouldn't. I smiled. Watch me. And with that, I walked out the door for the last time. I didn't turn back. I didn't check to see if they were shouting after me. I just walked straight to my car, started the engine, and drove. I expected the rage to hit me in waves, expected the heartbreak to crash down on me like it had 3 years ago. But instead, as I sped away from that house for the last time, all I felt was relief, like I had just shed 100-pound weight that I never even realized I was carrying, like I was finally free. They called. Of course they called. First, it was my mother, switching between anger and manipulation in a matter of minutes. You are overreacting, Piper. That money was just sitting there, and family helps family. Blocked. Then, my father. We just need to talk. You don't want to ruin our relationship over something so trivial, do you? Blocked. Emma sent a single text. Enjoy your lonely, bitter little life. Blocked. Jake didn't bother. He had finally learned to keep his cowardice quiet. The legal process was easier than I thought. Theft was theft, and with the bank records and transaction history in hand, my lawyer didn't even blink before drafting the paperwork. They tried to fight it, of course. Mom called me one last time, on a different number, just to scream, "You would put your own mother in legal trouble over a few $1,000s?" "No," I said calmly. "You did that to yourself," and then I hung up. A month later, the money was returned in full. I made sure to transfer it into a new account, in a new bank, with a new password, and just like that, every financial tie I had to them was severed. The wedding still happened. I didn't care. I saw glimpses of it here and there. Sarah, my cousin, sent me a blurry screenshot from a Facebook post. Emma in my dress. Jake looking exhausted. I didn't feel anything. The version of me that would have cried over it was long gone. Instead, I poured myself into work, travel, and living. A year later, Sarah and I met for drinks. She smirked over the rim of her glass. "So, you'll never guess what happened." I already knew. Jake and Emma were having problems. Of course they were. Emma was miserable. Jake was miserable. My parents, having spent years bending over backward for their perfect daughter, were now tired of supporting them. Their honeymoon phase had burned out fast, leaving nothing but ash. Sarah glanced at me, waiting for some reaction, some sign that I was gloating, but I wasn't. I was indifferent. I had outgrown them, outgrown the anger, the pain, the need for closure. They were ghosts to me now. I moved to a new city that summer, got a bigger apartment, one with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the skyline, a place that was entirely mine, built by no one's money but my own. And one evening, as I stood on my balcony, a glass of wine in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, I realized something. I was happy, not in the way I had been before Jake, not in the way I had been while trying to fit into my parents' world, but in a way that was deeper, real. I had won, not by revenge, not by proving them wrong, but by simply walking away and never looking back. I built my new life one quiet victory at a time. At first, it was small things. Waking up without checking my phone for missed calls from my parents, drinking my morning coffee in absolute peace, no longer waiting for the next wave of drama, falling asleep at night without replaying old conversations or wondering why they had chosen her over me. Then, it became bigger. I thrived at work, taking on projects that once felt out of reach. My boss noticed, and before I knew it, I had another promotion under my belt. The title of vice president that once seemed like an impossible dream was now printed on my office door. I made new friends, real ones, friends who didn't know my family, who didn't have years of history tied up in obligations and manipulation, friends who cheered for me because they liked me, not because they were guilt-tripped into doing so. And for the first time in years, I let myself be happy. I traveled. Greece in the summer, Japan in the fall, a solo trip to Italy, where I wandered the streets of Florence, ate gelato on sun-drenched steps, and wrote in a leather-bound journal like I was the main character of my own novel. Because I was. I wasn't the discarded sister. I wasn't the woman scorned. I wasn't the girl still waiting for an apology that would never come. I was Piper Parker, and that was enough. 3 years after I walked away, I got an email from Emma. I almost deleted it without reading it, but something in me, morbid curiosity perhaps, made me open it. The message was short. "Piper, I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe I just needed to say it. You were right. About everything. Jake isn't who I thought he was. Mom and Dad aren't who I thought they were. Maybe I'm not either. I'm sorry. Emma." I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for some sort of emotion to hit me. Anger, satisfaction, vindication. But there was nothing. Just a strange, quiet acceptance. I clicked out of the email. I didn't respond. Some things weren't worth reopening. One evening, Sarah and I sat on my balcony, sipping wine, watching the city lights blink like fireflies. "You really did it, didn't you?" she mused, swirling her glass. "You built a life they can't touch." I smiled. "Yeah, I did." Sarah hesitated. "Do you ever miss them?" I thought about it. I missed the idea of family. I missed the childhood memories, the times before I knew what they were capable of, but I didn't miss them. Because the family I once had never really existed. I shook my head. "No, I don't." Sarah raised her glass. "Then here's to you, Piper. To moving forward." I clinked my glass against hers. "To never looking back." And as I took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through me, I knew I had won, not by proving them wrong, not by seeking revenge, but by living, really living. And that was the best ending I could have ever asked for. Story 2. It was a regular Saturday morning, the kind where cartoons blare and you're munching cereal straight from the box. Then my parents sat me down at the kitchen table with that, "we need to talk" look. Usually, that meant I was in trouble. This time, it was something way weirder. "We've been thinking," Dad started, clearing his throat like he was about to announce we were moving to Mars. Mom took over, with that kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for surprise trips to Disneyland. "We've decided to adopt a child. You're going to have a little brother." Honestly, I didn't know whether to be excited or worried. I was 8, an only child, perfectly content with my Legos and undivided parental attention. "Why do we need another kid?" I asked, not bothering to hide my confusion. Mom and Dad exchanged one of those secret adult looks that screamed, "You'll understand when you're older. There are many children who need a loving family," Mom explained. "We have a lot of love to give, and we think it's a good thing to share that with a child who doesn't have what you do." It sounded noble, but all I heard was, I might have to share my room, my toys, and worst of all, my parents. 2 months later, enter Stephen. He was 7, a year younger than me, with a mop of curly hair and a shy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was from a rough background, foster homes and all that. The first few days, he was quiet as a mouse, tiptoeing around like he was afraid of breaking something, but the quiet didn't last. It took Stephen about a week to start showing his true colors. He had this knack, this almost genius-level talent for manipulating Mom and Dad. He could turn tears on and off like a faucet, and somehow always knew exactly what to say to get his way. At first, I thought it was cool having a brother. I showed him the ropes, how to sneak extra cookies, the best hiding spots for hide and seek, even shared my favorite comic books. But soon, it felt like he was the puppet master, and we were all dancing to his tune. His first masterstroke, the toys. My birthday rolled around, and I was hyped about the new bike I'd been hinting at for months. But when the day came, no bike. Instead, there was this fancy remote-controlled car for Stephen. "Stephen's never had a real birthday party or gifts like you've had," Dad explained when I asked. My 8-year-old brain couldn't comprehend it. Why did my birthday have to be about making Stephen happy? And that was just the start. Christmas came, and the pattern continued. I got socks and books. Stephen got the latest video game console. I remember staring at the tree, this knot in my stomach, as Stephen tore through his gifts with glee. When I asked why Santa favored him, Mom pulled the "he's had it rough" card again. As the months turned into years, the favoritism became blatant. Stephen was a natural at playing the victim, and my parents ate it up. If anything went wrong, somehow it was my fault, and Stephen was the injured party. The worst part? He knew exactly what he was doing. After every argument, once the parents were out of earshot, he'd shoot me this smug grin that made my blood boil. It wasn't just at home, either. We'd go out, and it would always be about what Stephen wanted. My favorite place in the world was this local pizza joint. They had the best cheesy garlic bread and arcade games. But Stephen? He was all about McDonald's. I hated McDonald's. But guess where we ended up 9 times out of 10? Yep, under the Golden Arches. It was during one of those McDonald's trips that I first seriously thought about how unfair it all was. There I was, picking at my chicken nuggets, while Stephen devoured a Big Mac like he owned the place. I remember thinking, this isn't right. Why am I the one who always has to give up what I want? My parents had an answer for everything, though. "Stephen needs more attention because of his difficult childhood," they'd say. Or, "Stephen feels left out, and we need to make sure he feels part of the family." It was always something, some reason that made my feelings seem less important. By the time my 16th birthday was on the horizon, I had a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things would be different. My parents had started talking about throwing a party at the pizza place. It sounded too good to be true, and it was. Leading up to the party, Stephen's moodiness hit new heights. He sulked, he pouted, making everyone around him miserable. I tried to ignore him, focusing on the guest list and the menu, anything to keep my spirits up. But deep down, I had that nagging feeling, the one you get when you know a storm is coming, but you hope maybe it'll pass you by. Spoiler alert, it didn't. As the years dragged on, the dynamic in our house didn't get any better. If anything, it got worse. Stephen was growing into his role as the golden child, and I was, well, just there. It felt like I was another piece of furniture, occasionally useful, mostly overlooked. Take any random Saturday. We'd all be sitting around, deciding what to do. I'd suggest hitting the batting cages, or maybe catching a movie, something we could all enjoy. But no, we'd end up at some kiddie park because Stephen had a sudden urge to ride the merry-go-round. And it wasn't just that he wanted to go. It was that my parents thought these little excursions were crucial for building his self-esteem, or some other parenting buzzword. The favoritism wasn't subtle either. It was right there in your face, every single day. Like this one time, I brought home a trophy from a school science fair. I was buzzing, couldn't wait to show Mom and Dad. I placed it proudly on the kitchen counter, waiting for them to come home. When they did, I got a quick, "That's nice, buddy," followed by a half-hour rave about how Steven had managed to score a goal in soccer practice. His goal wasn't even a game winner. It was just a goal during a regular practice session, but you would have thought he'd won the World Cup the way they went on about it. School events were a minefield too. My parents would always attend every single one of Steven's events. School plays, parent-teacher conferences, you name it. But when it came to my events, it was always, "Oh, we'll try to make it," which translated to, "Don't hold your breath." Most of the time, they didn't show. I remember looking out into the audience during my solo at the school concert and seeing those 2 empty chairs. It stung, man. It really did. Then there were the holidays, which were supposed to be happy times, right? Not in our house. Christmas was the worst. I remember one Christmas. I had been eyeing this video game for months. I dropped enough hints that I might as well have taken out an ad in the newspaper. Come Christmas morning, I was like a coiled spring, ready to finally get my hands on that game. I tore through my gifts, but no game. Instead, I found clothes, some books, and a pair of socks. Classic. But Steven, he got the game, the exact game I wanted. When I asked Mom why Steven got the game and not me, she just said, "Oh, honey, you know how tough Steven has it." We wanted to give him something special. I wanted to scream, "What about me? Don't I deserve something special too?" It wasn't like I needed material things to be happy, but it was about feeling valued, feeling seen, and I just didn't. Every gift opening session felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that I was the second choice, the backup plan. And it wasn't just big things like holidays or events. The day-to-day stuff added up too, like food. Yeah, even what we ate. If Steven wanted pizza and I wanted burgers, we'd be eating pizza. If I wanted to watch a movie and Steven wanted to play video games, the TV was his. My wants and needs were always sidelined. It was like living in a twisted version of that old saying, "What's mine is yours, and what's yours is yours." The resentment built up, like layers of dust on old furniture. It was gradual, but undeniable. I started spending more time alone in my room, headphones on, just trying to block out the unfairness of it all. I grew quieter at dinner, spoke less about my day, my achievements. Because what was the point? They weren't really listening, not unless it had something to do with Steven. Even my friends started to notice. They'd ask why I never invited them over anymore, or why I always seemed down. I'd shrug it off, not wanting to get into it. How do you explain that your family treats you like an afterthought, without sounding like you're throwing a pity party? The worst part was, I started to question if maybe there was something wrong with me. Why wasn't I good enough to warrant the same attention and love? I'd lie awake at night, wrestling with these thoughts, feeling like maybe I just wasn't as lovable or as interesting as Steven. It was during one particularly low evening, right after another celebratory dinner for some minor achievement of Steven's, that I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I was up in my room, the sounds of their laughter drifting up from downstairs. They were probably toasting to Steven's mastery of some video game level or another. That night, I started to plan. Not just idle daydreaming, but actual planning. How could I get out? What did I need to do to make a life for myself where I was the priority? It wasn't just about getting away from them. It was about finding a place where I could matter. By the time my 18th birthday rolled around, I was more than ready to make my escape. It was now or never. I had to make my move as soon as I was legally an adult. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had the plan all mapped out. I'd pack my things, say my goodbyes, or maybe not, and walk out that door into a new life. I didn't have much to take, which was both sad and a relief. A couple of bags of clothes, some personal items, and my laptop. That was it. That was my life, contained in 2 duffel bags. It was almost laughable how little I had to show for my years at home, but it was enough. It had to be. About a week before D-Day, I started packing. It wasn't like in the movies, where the kid throws everything into a bag in a rage and storms out. I was methodical, making sure I had everything I needed, making sure I wouldn't have to come back for anything. I double-checked my stash of money, counted it 3 times, and tucked it into a hidden compartment in my bag. The night before my birthday, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, going over the plan in my head for the 100th time. Move out, go to college, get a degree, start a real life. It sounded simple, but the weight of what I was about to do felt like a boulder on my chest. Morning came, and I pretended everything was normal. I went through the motions, ate breakfast, even laughed at one of Stephen's dumb jokes. Inside, though, I was a mess of nerves. My hands shook as I poured my coffee, and I had to take deep breaths to calm myself down. The plan was to wait until everyone was out of the house, but fate, it seemed, had other ideas. My mom decided to work from home that day, and Stephen had a half day at school. My window of opportunity was closing fast, and I knew it. I waited, heart pounding, until my mom was on a long conference call. Then I grabbed my bags, which I'd stashed under my bed, and tiptoed down the stairs. Every step was a thunderclap in my ears, every creak of the floorboards a shout. I made it to the front door, hand on the doorknob, when my mom walked out of her office. "Where are you going with those?" she asked, eyes narrowing. For a moment, I considered lying, saying I was just taking out some old clothes for donation, but I was done lying, done pretending. "I'm moving out," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The look on her face was a mix of confusion and concern. "Moving out? Why? What's wrong?" "Everything's wrong," I replied. "I can't do it anymore. I can't live here feeling like a ghost in my own home." Mom was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Is this about Stephen? Is this because we got him a car for his birthday?" It was so much more than that. But how could I explain years of neglect in a single conversation? "It's not just about the car," I said. "It's about every birthday, every Christmas, every single day, feeling like I'm second best." We stood there at an impasse, neither of us sure what to say next. Finally, my mom stepped aside. "If that's what you think is best," she said quietly. I nodded, opened the door, and stepped out into the sunlight. It was the hardest and easiest thing I'd ever done. As I walked down the driveway, I didn't look back. I couldn't. I had to believe that there was something better ahead, something worth all this pain. And as I climbed into the cab of my friend's truck, the one who'd agreed to help me move, I felt a mix of fear and relief. I was free, finally, irrevocably free, and there was no going back. I had arranged for my friend's older brother, Phil, to pick me up. He was one of the few people I'd confided in about my plans. He understood why I needed to leave, and he supported me without question. His beat-up truck rolled up to our house just past 10 a.m., right on time. I dragged my bags out the front door, taking one last look around before I closed it behind me. Phil gave me a nod as I loaded my bags into the back of the truck. "You ready for this?" he asked, his expression serious. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The drive to my new apartment in the nearby city was quiet. I spent most of it looking out the window, watching the familiar landscape slowly give way to the new, unknown streets of my future home. It was a mix of suburban sprawl and urban clutter, a far cry from the neatly manicured lawns of my old neighborhood. The apartment was in a modest building, a bit run down, but it was mine. It was a tangible piece of my independence, something I had secured on my own. The rent was affordable, thanks to a deal I'd worked out with a friend of a friend who owned the place. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with a tiny kitchen and a living room that you could cross in 3 strides, but it was a fresh start. Phil helped me unload my bags and carry them up to the 3rd floor. There was no elevator, and by the time we reached my apartment, I was out of breath, but exhilarated. This was it. My new home. "Not bad, huh?" Phil said as he looked around the sparse room. "A little paint, some curtains, and it'll look pretty good." I nodded, my mind already racing with ideas on how to make the space my own. "Yeah, it's perfect." After Phil left, I spent the first few hours just unpacking and arranging things. I didn't have much, so it didn't take long. I set up my laptop on the small desk in the corner of the living room and hung a few posters on the walls. It was bare, but it was a beginning. That first night, I lay in bed in my new apartment, listening to the sounds of the city. Cars honked, people shouted, and somewhere nearby, a dog barked incessantly. It was noisy, so different from the quiet, oppressive atmosphere of my parents' house. Here, there was life, chaos, and it was invigorating. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I enrolled in the local college, using the scholarship I had secured to cover most of the tuition. I found a part-time job at a nearby cafe, which gave me enough income to cover my living expenses and start building some savings again. College was a revelation. I was studying subjects I cared about, meeting people who were interested in the same things I was. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of this opportunity. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of doubt, nights when I lay awake wondering if I had made the right decision. The break from my family was harder than I had anticipated. There were times I missed them, or rather, the idea of them. I missed what I had always hoped our family could be, not what it actually was. Those moments of weakness were tough, but I pushed through them. I had to. Going back wasn't an option. I knew that no matter how hard it got, it couldn't be worse than feeling invisible in my own home. As I settled into my new life, I began to feel more and more confident in my decision. I made friends, good friends, who supported and encouraged me. I was doing well in my classes, and my professors were taking notice of my hard work. I had escaped. I had taken control of my life, and I was building something new, something that was all mine. And for the first time in a long time, I looked forward to what the future held. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, and I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I had the strength to face them. I was no longer the overlooked second son. I was my own person, and my life was finally my own.